You're listening to Ruthie's Table 4 in partnership with Montclair. In the last 24 hours, since Francis Ford Coppola said he would sit down with me after lunch in the River Cafe, good friends who know us both, Wes Anderson, Fisher Stevens, Greta Gerwig, said, "Ruthie, you're going to love him." And the biggest compliment of all was, "You two are rather alike." Do they mean being a chef is like being a director? Or producing a movie is like running a restaurant? Or choosing the grapes for your vineyard is like choosing the herbs for your fish? Or most of all, do they mean having your family involved in everything you do? I'll take any of the above. For me, the test of a great movie is you can turn it on and, like choosing from a great menu, you can pick any scene and it will be compelling. That's what I do with the classics, The Godfather, The Conversation, Apocalypse Now. Francis's most recent movie, Megalopolis, has just opened, and the line at the end, "The human being shall rightly be called a great miracle," is a message of hope and resilience in these turbulent times. Surviving difficult times is also something Francis and I share. With the death of our sons in their 20s, Giancarlo and Beau, when they were far too young, and recently the death of our life partners. There is much that connects us, and again, Francis and I think the same, that there is nothing better than connecting over food. So here we are, 24 hours later, and I think our friends were right. I'm going to love him.
Well, thank you for the lovely comments that you've made, Ruth.
So for lunch today, you had, as a starter,
Puntarella, which is a Roman salad, which you only have certain times of year. And basically, Italians have a taste for bitter. Puntarella is really a bitter salad. So it comes from a kind of winter cicoria plant, which is divided and cut up in a certain way and served with olive oil and anchovy. And capers sometimes and sometimes not. And this is the famous Puntarella salad that you get in a Roman restaurant.
It is a great way to start a meal, I think, if you're going to
I
have.
love Puntarella.
And then
we didn't eat it when we were kids because we ate food that was either Neapolitan from my mother's side or Luccanese, Bernalda, the region in the extreme south of Italy, which is my father's side. Well, it says here, Puntarella. It says 2 Puntarella heads. The vegetable is cicoria, and it's a winter cicoria. 12 salted anchovy fillet cut into small pieces, 4 tablespoons red wine vinegar, 1 garlic clove peeled and finely chopped, some dried red chili, peperoncino rosso, and then 6 tablespoons of virgin olive oil. And you slice the buds into these little thin stalks, and you place in the water, a bowl of ice water to crisp, and they'll curl up. Combine the anchovies, garlic, and chili and cover with vinegar. Leave for 15 minutes. Add 6 tablespoons of olive oil. Dry the Puntarella segments, and then put in a bowl and spoon the stuff over it, and that's your Puntarella salad.
So you grew up in a house that served incredible food when a lot of Southern Italians
From my father and grandfather.
From your father and grandfather came to the United States. I grew up in upstate New York, 100 miles north of New York City. And when we went out to an Italian restaurant, we would have veal parmesan, we would have the meatballs and spaghetti, the food of the Godfather.
Even meatballs, if you know what you're doing, to really make meatballs, well, number one, you have to have 3 components. A meatball is 1/3 pork, 1/3 veal, and 1/3 beef, and with a lot of breadcrumbs.
But the scene in The Godfather, if we can talk about that, I watched it again and I thought, you know what, the way he said, and then throw in this and add that, so nonchalant. It's not the way.
When I wrote that scene, I wrote it the way I knew how to do it, and I said, well, first you brown the sausage. And then
did he say to fry it?
And Mario said, gangsters don't say brown. Pranksters say fry. So we changed it to fry. Then he said, and then the secret is true, that the secret of a good meat sauce is a little bit of sugar.
Yeah.
You add a half a tablespoon of sugar to a meat sauce. So the recipes were authentic, but we tried to give them a gangster type of vocabulary. Although I must say that the reason I'm convinced that The Godfather was successful is because it was the first gangster film that had a lot of kids running around in the scenes.
Of course.
You never were gangster pictures as though they didn't have kids. But of course, an Italian wedding was all the kids
That
sliding
first scene.
around.
So you grew up in a family that cooked Italian food, but in New York.
In New York.
Speaking Italian, that's how we started. Did you actually speak Italian at home?
No. I only heard some cursing, but my mother didn't want us to be, like, Italians couldn't live in certain neighborhoods.
Yeah, it was very
And the
sick.
Italians, each immigrant group in America was bullied by the one that came before. And the one who came before the Italians were the Irish. And the Irish used to beat up on the Italians.
The policeman in The Godfather, right?
Yeah, the police were all Irish, and they used to pick. That's the way it works.
So you were restricted to this neighborhood. And did you experience food other than Italian food, or was eating always
like if you see The Godfather, you realize that I knew that Italians used to get takeout Chinese food.
Yeah.
Every street corner in New York had a German delicatessen, a candy store, what we called a candy store, which was a soda fountain where they sold Coke, which was 5 cents, and they would make it to put the syrup, and it wouldn't be in a bottle, and model airplanes, and a German delicatessen where you would buy cheesecake. And,
so there would be a mix.
Always a Chinese restaurant. In those neighborhoods, there were a lot of Polish people and Italians because they were both Catholic, and there were a lot of Italian-Polish weddings because they were both Catholic. And I went to a lot of Polish weddings, and I knew what Polish food was like. They had kielbasa, whereas we had sausage. America was a wonderful a mixture of cultures.
And we want to keep that.
And we want to keep that.
We want to keep that. And then, should we talk about polio?
We'll talk about anything you want. You
so
ask me a question.
Well, I'd be interested in the fact that as a child, you had polio and spent how long in bed?
I spent the whole 6th grade, so a whole year and a little more than a year. And in those days, polio, of course, it had also affected adults. President Franklin Roosevelt had polio, but it was an epidemic for children in 1949. And I was a Cub Scout, and I went on a Cub Scout camp out, and it was raining, and the next morning I had the symptoms. And polio only affects you one night. In other words, the night of the fever is the night you have it, and then you get over it, but the damage is to your spinal cord, and the polio destroys the nerves selectively within the spinal cord, so that, literally when I woke up in a ward with like 800 kids piled up everywhere crying, a whole row of iron lungs because the kids whose lungs were affected couldn't breathe, so they had to be in a machine that breathed, and they were crying for their parents. It was a nightmare. And then I felt so sad for all these kids, and then I got out of bed. I tried to get out of bed, I just fell on the floor, and I realized I couldn't walk. And I was never too scared at first, but I stayed there for about a week more, and then finally they took me home. And my father was very sharp. The method, they took me to this, I remember, a French doctor who gave me a big speech of like I was a soldier and I was going to be a good soldier. And then he told me the prognosis, which was, he says, well, you'll be able to do everything a normal person could do, but always in a wheelchair. And I was just, I hadn't realized that it was that serious. So I remember being very emotional, and we all went to have my favorite. We all went to have Chinese food and crying in the Mugugai pen. And they took me home, my father, and they pinned me in the bed so I couldn't move. That was the way they thought you should treat it. And it didn't make sense to my father. And he heard about another method, which was the Sister Kinney method. Sister Kinney was an Australian nurse who had decided that rather than make the paralyzed victim immobilized so they don't damage their muscle, and instead you did therapy. You did the opposite. My father went and talked to them and got the Polio Infantile Paralysis Association to pay for a Sister Kenny therapist came. And this lady came, her name was Miss Wilson, a wonderful lady. And she worked on me, and it was very gentle exercises, but they were, and I was in this room, I just watched television. They had puppets, I played with puppets.
Well, the puppets is interesting because did that make you think about film? Do you think that
No,
was
it made
any...
me think about having friends. I wanted to be
Your
with
friends,
kids.
yeah.
I wanted, there was a show on television in those days, sponsored by Horn and Hardart. You remember the automat? And it was called the Children's Hour.
Yeah.
And it was all these talented kids singing and dancing, and I just wanted to be part of that.
Yeah, when I grew up in the 50s, there was Howdy Doody. Do you remember
Well,
that?
Howdy Doody, I could tell you Howdy Doody stories too.
My parents took me. They knew somebody who worked on the Howdy Doody
And you
program.
were in the
and we were in the
peanut gallery?
audience. I was in the peanut
That
gallery.
was called the Peanut Gallery.
The peanut gallery.
We
Remember
were
the
lucky.
song?
It's Howdy Doody time, it's Howdy Doody time.
Come on and join the show.
Bob was there to go. It's time a rousing cheer, because Howdy Doody's here. It's time to start the show. Well,
Come
kids,
on,
let's go.
God, I haven't sung that song for a long
But
time.
he didn't look like that. One night I said to my parents, look, I went like that. And I couldn't do that with my left arm. And they were shocked. And then eventually I was able, I never could run fast, though, after that, but I was a good wrestler. I went to the same military school that Donald Trump went to. I went to many high schools, and I went to New York Military Academy. And
When did you study film?
I was a theater student, and I was very successful in college. I directed a lot of plays, and I was slated to go to the Yale Drama School. And then one afternoon, I saw a movie in a theater by the great Russian director Sergei Eisenstein, and I saw that and came out and said, wow, I never saw anything like that. I'm going to be a film director.
Was it Potemkin?
No, it was October,
October.
10 days that shook the world, and I went to the UCLA Film School.
And so California then, so that was in what? That would have been in what
That was
year?
in 1960.
Yeah, so that was the time when you went to the LA Film School.
I went to UCLA.
Yeah. And what was that like?
I was a graduate student. I was very poor. I ran away from military school, so my father was not going to help me very much. He was very angry because when I ran away from military school, he had to pay anyway for that year, and he didn't never forgive me for that. So when I went to UCLA, I had about $1.25 a day to live on. So I had 25 cents for breakfast, 50 cents for lunch, and 50 cents for dinner. So I pretty much ate every night Kraft macaroni and cheese dinners. And I just got fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. And I was very depressed. I had no money. I had no car. I had no girlfriend. I was pretty miserable, and there was a time when I thought I would quit, and I had a wonderful directing teacher, a woman, who was the only woman director in Hollywood during the 30s. Her name was Miss Arzner, Dorothy Arzner. She was great. She was so smart, and we all, everyone who studied with Miss Arzner, and we call her Miss Arzner because we respected her so much, and she was just terrific.
And did she get you your first film?
No, what happened was I was there one night and very depressed, and I would pretty much decided that I was going to go back to New York and get a job as a stage manager because I would get a salary and I could. And she said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm Miss Arzner. I'm just miserable. I'm going to go back. I've decided I'm going to quit, and I'm going to get a job as a stage manager." And she looked at me and she said, "You know, I've been around and I know. You'll make it, I know." And she left. And because she told me that, and we looked up to her so much, and you look her up, she was a great woman. Miss Arzner said, "You'll make it, I've been around and I know." I stayed. And ultimately, I stayed at UCLA and I won this Goldwyn Prize, which was a writing award, and it was $2,000, and that was a big turning point in my life. There were two schools that were competing. There was USC, which was considered more of a technically oriented school, and there was more UCLA, which was more sort of artsy-fartsy, kind of directors who wanted to be the new Fellini and the new this and that. So there was a competition between USC and UCLA. And I emerged as a star of UCLA because I won the Goldwyn Prize. And then I made as a thesis a feature film, which was unheard of. A commercial film as my thesis film was a movie in New York called You're a Big Boy Now. Mm-hmm. And I got married. I had 2 kids. And, I always thought that being married with kids was good for me because instead of, going out, having fun, screwing around, I was concerned with supporting my family. I had a wife and 2 kids. I loved my kids. Yeah. Gio was my first, Giancarlo, and Sophia, and Roman. Sophia was born during The Godfather. So what happened was I got a job to direct Fred Astaire in a big musical called Finian's Rainbow. And as I was directing this, I was a young guy with a crew of adults all wearing suits and ties. I noticed there was a skinny kid watching what was going on. And I went over to him and I said, hi. And he said, hi, what you doing? What are you looking at? He said, nothing much. I said, well, what are you doing here? He says, well, I'm a USC student and I won a scholarship to observe. I came over to look at the Warner Brothers animation department, but I heard there was a UCLA student directing this movie, so I thought I'd watch. I said, oh, great. What's your name? He said, George Lucas. That's George Lucas. And I said, well, you want to come every day and watch the film? He said, sure. I said, well, on one condition you can. He says, what's that? I said, well, you got to come up with a brilliant idea every day. And he said, I'll do that. And he did. And so I met this wonderful kid who, of course, became a...
What year would that have been?
Well, that would be Finian's Rainbow. So, and I had a little boy like about 2, so that must have been about 1965 at the worst. And that made a marriage between UCLA because then not only did I meet George, but I met all of the USC guys, and they met all the UCLA guys, so that we began to, then we went off and made a film. I said, if you come off and help me with this film, I'll sponsor your first film. And we made a film called The Rain People, where we actually rode across the country in a bus and editing, and then he made a film called THX 38, and we founded, that's when it became American Zoetrope. We founded a company, and we decided to put it in San Francisco.
Why San Francisco, away from Los Angeles, the studios?
But by being in San Francisco with no money, it determined that we, as we always knew, picture and sound equally contribute to a movie being good, but sound is much cheaper. So we made a big investment in sound, and that really changed because there was a company in San Francisco called Dolby that was very nice and liked us and always helped us. But they benefited because they saw everything we were doing, and we changed movies both in terms of the sound, and then when George made Star Wars, he decided that if we could shoot in a digital format, they wouldn't have to convert from film to digital for effects and back to film. So we really, because of our poverty, we changed the face of cinema around the world through Dolby.
Do you have memories of food at that time? Did he like good food, Lucas?
I was a good army cook. I could cook for 50 people. Yeah. And I always used to cook for everyone, but
everyone on the set?
Yeah, I can cook dinner for 50, 60 people with no trouble at all. I have done it.
Yeah.
I once went to I went to teach at Cuba. I was invited along with Terry Malick and some people to go to Cuba and go at the Cuban Film School. And I said to them, I'd like to cook for the students. And they said, well, what do you want to cook? I said, well, I don't know. Do you have tomatoes? They said, sure. I said, do you have basil, whatever that was called, prezzemolo, they had basil. I said, do you have any pasta? No, we don't have pasta. Well, do you have potatoes? Do you have potatoes? I said, yeah, and flour. So I made gnocchi. And they said, but you can't just make it for the students. We're a socialist country. You have to make it for everybody. So I said, well, how many people would have to eat? They said 500. So we cooked gnocchi for 500 people. But we did it.
That's a lot.
We did
That's
it.
a lot.
And it was great.
And they had the right potatoes, because for gnocchi you need those very dry.
I got whatever potatoes they gave me. There was no selection in Cuba.
Yeah.
And then the next year I went, they said, are you going to cook again? I said, yes, this time I brought pasta.
Yeah.
We had a pasta company. So I cooked at Cuba maybe 3-4 times.
But with all of you in Spielberg and Lucas, and who was part of that other, Scorsese was there. Did you all have meals together? Was eating out?
Well,
did you,
all of them.
Were they friends?
Yes, but of all of them, the only one who were my kind of Italian was Marty. It was his parent, his mother. She wrote a very good cookbook, which you can still get. It's hard. Mrs. Catherine Scorsese.
One thing for moving ahead to The Godfather is that we all know the scene. Of course, we know the scene we were just talking about of cooking the sauce or getting the cannoli. But for me, it's about citrus as well. And
Citrus?
Because the two scenes that I thought, and
that was an accident. I always had someone bring an orange.
Yeah.
But the orange became a symbol.
So we're going to talk about the two scenes. One of them, which was in the market when he's choosing the oranges. Fruit? Yeah, and then he's shot, right? When Brando is shot.
That was right across the street.
That's a premonition that he realizes he's going to be killed.
There was this orange motif that was not true. It's just that I had always said, well, bring an orange as a gift from Florida or something.
It's very Sicilian, no? Isn't it?
I didn't know that. It became a symbol, but I didn't know that.
And what about the scene at the very end when he's playing with his child?
That scene they cut out of the script because they felt...
Can you describe that scene? That's the scene where...
Yeah, well, let me tell you the circumstance of it.
Okay.
That scene was cut out of the script because they figured if we just cut to the graveyard, you'll know he died. So what did you have to see him die? But I wanted to shoot him dying in the tomato patch. So when I was shooting the wedding, I had got this little tomato patch developed. In fact, we had to bring the tomatoes, fly them in at great expense from Chicago because we had no tomatoes. And during lunch, I was over there trying to get the shot of him with his grandson. And the minder that they had on me said, you can't do this. The scene's been cut. I said, well, let me I can get one shot, and I'm going to go to, you have to go to lunch. I said, and I did the one shot, and then I went to lunch. And the kid didn't want to do it. So Brandon said, let me do something I do for my grandkids. And he on his own. I didn't know what he was going to do.
Is that true?
He cut the orange and he did it like a monster, and the kid cried. So it became memorable, and it got put in the picture, and then I shot the rest of it of him running around. So that was a scene that they had tried to cut out, that because of Brando's ingenuity, it ended in.
Also, they're running around and playing a game, and the child actually thinks that him falling down and dying is part of the game, doesn't he? He doesn't realize. But it was cut out of the movie. It's luck that Brando did that, and the kid, because they were standing there wanting me to cut. When Brando did his first day, everyone saw his first day, and they said, "Oh, the stuff is too dark, and he's mumbling, and we hate it." One of the people who was sort of on my side, said to me, Francis, they're going to fire you this weekend. Because they never fire a director in the middle of the week. They always fire the director on the weekend, so the new director has time to come in and get everything organized. So he said, they're going to fire you this weekend. So knowing that, that day that I heard that, I fired the 15 people that were in on the cabal that were going to fire me. And no one knew that I even had the authority to do that. I just did it. And because I wanted to reshoot the shot of Brando that they didn't like. And when I said I want to do it, they said, no, don't do it. That's when he said they're going to fire you. So I fired everyone. I went up and I reshot the scene. What was the scene? What was it?
It was the first scene where he comes in and has the meeting with Sollozzo in the olive oil factory. So they thought it was too dark and Brando was mumbling. So I reshot it. So then everyone had to wait and see in the weekend, and everyone was saying, can he do that? And, maybe he can't, and is he fired? I didn't know. I thought they were going to fire me anyway. So, but they waited, and then they decided that the reshoot was much better. And so they said they weren't going to fire me, and the head of the company brought me to the Palm Steakhouse and bought me and my father dinner and said that, they were going to stay with me.
I'm always interested in meetings that take place in restaurants. So they took you to a restaurant.
They took me to the Palm restaurant, which I think Charlie Bluhdorn owned part of, and my father too, and they said they weren't going to fire me. But the truth of the matter is that in the movie, it's the first scene. In other words, they didn't know what they were talking about. The Godfather was dark. That was its style.
That scene where he's just talking.
Brando won an Oscar for The Godfather, and he always mumbled. He told me he mumbled deliberately because it was easier to add to what lines later he wanted to.
Michael Caine said to me that almost every movie that was offered to him or that he thought of from being offered a part in was done in a restaurant. So I'm really interested in restaurants and work and restaurants, how people go to restaurants and how they use restaurants. People do, I always say, very private things in a very public space. They'll fire people in a restaurant.
Oh, there were a bunch of famous restaurants, show business restaurants. Sardi's.
What were they?
Sardi's
in
one
New
of
York.
the famous. Elaine's in New York. Mm-hmm. Elaine was a lady much like you. Did you know Elaine?
No, I never met her.
She conducted a sort of
salon.
It's more like a salon.
But in Hollywood, would people take you to a restaurant?
I used to write with Mario Puzo, and I would go with him because he loved to gamble. I would go with him to the Peppermill Casino in Reno, and we would work in the Peppermill because in a gambling casino you can order, ham and eggs at 3 in the morning or anything else, and then you can go. It's 24 hours a day. And all the work I always did with Mario was always in a gambling casino in Reno.
Feeding people, you were telling me at lunch that you wanted to tell me the story about having to give the crew lunch. And if you don't...
I tried to give the crew, because, a crew works so hard that their only entertainment, their only amusement is lunch, their meals.
When you say crew, you mean the people who are not actors?
Everyone, including
everybody.
The actors. I mean, they're working sometimes 12 hours a day. So I had lunches, and I would have 2 kinds of wine, which now is illegal, by the way. But I would.
You can't serve wine on set?
Not now, you can't. In France, they do. I had 2 kinds of wine. I was famous for wonderful lunches. And on Friday, I would always have a special treat because it was a final thank you. So I doubled the meal budget so that they could do something really wonderful on Fridays as a thank you. Because that's the only entertainment the crew gets.
Yeah. And you said that you were punished if you were late for giving them lunch by having
there's such a thing called a meal penalty. When you're on a movie set and it's time to say lunch has to be at 1 o'clock. It all depends on what time the day starts. 1 o'clock. If it's 1:15, everyone gets $100 for the 15 minutes, and then those are penalties. And where it comes from, in the 1920s, there was a Hungarian director named Michael Curtiz. He was a gentleman, so he would have them work, and they'd bring a table and serve him a 4-course dinner while everyone else was working and was eating nothing. So because of that, the union put in a meal penalty.
And what about the famous canteens? Mel Brooks always talked about seeing Cary Grant going into the canteen. Well,
that was in a lot of the studios had, like I remember, Fox had a big area where they would have lunch. That's where I saw where Mia Farrow, in a huff, cut off all long hair and went in there angry about something. But I don't know which canteen he saw Cary Grant. Cary Grant was extraordinary.
The stars of the early days, whether it was
I know that
Bogart or Hepburn. Did you ever meet Olivia?
I know one thing is true, that Jack Warner used to have a private dining room, and he would require that the directors and stuff come into his private dining room, and that's where. And then next to it he had a room with all his awards, and you had to go. In other words, you had to go.
Jack Warner called, you went.
You were expected to be in there at least 3 times a week. That's where I first had matzah. And I liked matzah a lot, so I was always happy to go in matzah. But I brought with me once into the dining room Petula Clark. And I didn't realize that there was no women had ever been in the private dining room of Jack Warner.
We have two similarities. For people who've met 6 hours ago or 4 hours ago, we have both lost our life partners. You, your wife, Eleanor, and
I'll
myself.
tell you about the loss of a child.
Tell me. Well, we both have shared that.
You lost your son. What happened to me, and maybe it didn't happen to you, but to me, it was 30 years before the first thing I thought of was what had happened. Mm-hmm. And then finally, after 30 years, if you can imagine, I woke up one morning and it wasn't the first thing I thought of. And I realized that it was the beginning of getting past it. So that, for me, it was a 30-year sentence.
When was that, 30 years? When
well, it was 30 years.
How many years ago was that?
Well, I mean, he died his daughter is 34 years old, so that was New Year's on the year he died. So 34 years ago, so it was 4 years ago.
4 years
every
ago.
morning,
Yeah.
the first thing I thought of was, oh, did that happen? And that was like terrible. Did that happen for you?
Yeah.
For how long every morning was it the first thing you thought of?
Well, for me, it was 13 years ago. Right?
And you still wake up and it's the first thing you think?
I don't know if it would be the first thing I woke up with, but I certainly would be buying an orange in the market and think of it.
Well,
I'd walk into his room and think of it. I'd see something that reminded me hear music. So for me, it takes, yeah.
Well, my sentence was the first thing, did it happen?
And are you feeling that about your wife now?
No. My wife is funny because I just all the time I think, well, I there's someone I got to tell something, and I got to tell her that. But no, I don't have to tell her that because it's different because your son, you don't expect to get that news. Whereas I knew I was with her when she died. I was holding her hand. Mm. And I knew she wanted to go because she was so in such discomfort and pain. So I mean, the whole family was there holding her, and we did it deliberately for her. Mm-hmm. A child, you don't expect that news. It was just a horrible news. I couldn't believe it when they told me.
And you were making a film.
I started to make a film. Yeah.
Could you work?
I did, but I continued. They said, you don't have to, we'll abandon. I said, no, he'd want me to finish it. Mm. But that was what I noticed, is that it was like a 30-year sentence of being heartbroken the instant I woke up every morning. But there's that beautiful Aeschylus, how it drops on you drop by drop until by the awful grace of God, you're given a break, Aeschylus, can you imagine Aeschylus, how long ago that is?
Death of a child.
It's not something... Fortunately, there aren't many people today who've experienced that. It's rare.
I remember thinking that would be how I was defined, that I would be the woman whose child had died. This is how I
it used to be years ago when families were bigger, people would have 7, 8 kids. They always lost 1 or 2. Mm. It was part of having a lot of kids. But it's rare now. That they're not.
Yeah.
Those people who lose a child, thank God, is a small minority. Mm. It's a terrible group to be part of.
And if we need comfort, we find comfort. I find right now, we talked about this for a moment as well, about when my husband died, that I find comfort in being active. My comfort is to keep working and being here.
Oh, for sure.
Doing that you have for me. Well, other people, I have a friend whose brother died in an accident, and he was French, and her mother went to bed for 6 months.
Yeah,
and that's whatever it is, people find their own way. But for me, it's being active, and for comfort, we find comfort in different ways. And I suppose my last question to you today, though I think we should do another one of this because there's so much more to talk about, is if you had to find comfort in food, if there was something that you could eat before your diet that you would find that would give you comfort, would there be a food that you would define as comforting? What would that be?
Halva.
Halva, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
it. That I would not have expected. Why?
I love it. I always loved when I was a little kid.
Can you describe what halva is?
Halva is a Middle Eastern peoples of different origin. It's made of ground sesame seeds and egg albumin and sugar, probably.
Honey. I think it has honey in it,
I
does
don't
it?
know.
I
Well, a
think
lot
maybe
of
it has
Middle
honey.
Eastern foods has. I love Middle Eastern food.
I do too. You're going to make a movie. What is it about?
It's about a time in the 30s when marriage and marriageability was in very caste related. In other words, you had to be in your crowd or your set in order to consider marriage. And then people would marry, and then they would get divorced and marry upwards. And a marriage was sort of for gain.
And you're going to film it here.
Well, no, I'm going to base it here and then do it all over. They go to Venice, they go to Beirut, they go to all the places rich people go to.
Oh, we want you here. We want you to be here. To the future. Thank you for listening to Ruthie's Table 4 in partnership with Montclair.